Where's everyone going? Bingo?
No thanks, bro. Your right hand comes off?
Resident Evil 4 was a colossal change for the series that swept away everything the games had been about up to that point. Resident Evil 7 was another mutation, but it wasn't quite as bold. Capcom was mostly trying to recreate the feeling of the original in a first-person perspective. Village is a direct continuation of that style, but with the twist that it's Resident Evil 4 being used as the foundation this time. It's a very backward-looking game that crosses so many wires from previous installments that it's absurd, but Capcom managed to make it the good kind of absurd. It reuses the formula from 7. Ethan is looking for a lost loved one, starting in a creepy woods and then moving on to a large estate where he's stalked by a charismatic monster. There's a table scene to establish the basic situation. Ethan has to ram something with a car, and he suffers a severe injury to his left hand. This was my least favorite part of 7, and it continues into 8. The first-person view lent itself to a gimmicky type of horror where the game was shoving gross things in your face for shock value. Ethan's hands are the only part of him that you can really see, so it makes sense that they end up being the main source of gore. But after a couple of consequence-free dismemberments, it's hard to fall for it again. It becomes cartoon violence. No matter what happens to Ethan's hands, they're fine 5 minutes later. The game does offer an explanation for this, but by the time it arrives, the story has fully entered Crazy Town and everything is too silly to matter. Silliness has worked for Resident Evil before, but you don't want it mixed up with the horror. The thing the developer is trying to scare you with shouldn't be the joke. It does feel like Capcom was aiming for terror, realized they had jumped the shark, and then said fuck it and rolled with it. That was the turning point where I realized this isn't a horror game. Anyone playing this to be scared is probably going to be disappointed. There are a few pockets of horror that are genuinely scary, but not really Resident Evil scary. They feel much more like PT or even Silent Hill. Outside of those, the game is pretty relaxed and easy to play. You meander around having a good time shooting werewolves and amassing cash. This is the Resident Evil 4 influence at work, and Village feels more like it than any over-the-shoulder entry managed to. The entire scenario was lifted from 4 and piled on top of the framework from 7. You start outdoors in a European farming village, then move on to an ornate castle, and without spoiling too much, end up seeing basically everything else from 4 in a reworked form. Enemies drop ammo and money again, and you collect gems to sell to a merchant who powers up your guns. The game is so recycled that even its jokes are ripped off.
What are you buying? Just something an old friend of mine used to say.
What are you buying? Heard that in a game once.
This may sound like a bad thing, but it's actually what makes Village work. It's mashing together the best stuff from over 2 decades of Resident Evil to create this insane chimera of gameplay. It's not a mess of ideas like Resident Evil 6 was. Capcom was very smart about keeping it focused and balanced. It's not the best at horror or action or any one specific thing, but it's a good enough all-arounder to make it the best modern game in the series. There's far more content than the remakes of 2 or 3, and it offers more puzzles and backtracking than anything since the fixed camera era. There's always something to unlock when returning to the village, and it will take 3 or 4 passes to collect it all. That process is aided by an excellent map that marks off obstructions and indicates whether all pickups have been found or not. It doesn't give away the locations, but it does enough to let you know when it's safe to move on. There are similar conveniences with the treasure system, which lists whether the item is ready to sell or not. It was kind of annoying to accidentally pawn unfinished treasure in 4, so Capcom improved it. One of the benefits of revisiting so many old ideas is that Capcom has hindsight on their side. They know what worked and what didn't, and in most cases the mechanics are much better polished than the games they first appeared in. The vampire lady everyone was horny for is basically Jack's equivalent in this game. Some of his appearances felt a little too scripted and choreographed, and Nemesis suffered even more from that problem, only appearing at specific places. Mr. X roamed freely, but he was ever present to an annoying degree and was too stupid to pose much of a threat. It was like being followed by a loud concrete slab. Lady Dimitrescu is also free to roam everywhere, but she's not stuck to you like a magnet the whole time. You'll see her, and she's enough of a threat that you'll move more carefully through the castle, but she doesn't dominate the gameplay. I much prefer this to Mr. X, since she can actually take you by surprise, and the fact that she's also an interesting character elevates her as a stalker. Her actress really sells the fact that she's furious at you, and that adds a lot of intensity to the chases. She's not as big a part of the game as the marketing made it seem, though. There's a much bigger cast of villains vying for your time outside of her family, and while they're all completely ridiculous, the story is entertaining and unpredictable. This is another Resident Evil 4 quality that Village channels well, and like that game, it leans more and more into action until the ending is all machine guns and explosions, and I was on board with it. It gets harder to scare you as your arsenal levels up, so the transition to more action feels natural. Capcom had a firm grasp on what was making the game fun and what it needed to do to stay fun, and the older areas keep evolving with new threats each time you revisit them. Compared to 7, it's a much fuller journey that covers more ground in the same amount of time. It's also easily one of the most visually ambitious games in the series, with a lot of impressive scenery. Most Resident Evil games take place in a series of small, dirty rooms, so the larger scale is a nice change of pace. The one weak spot is that the game spends entirely too much time in samey catacombs. No matter where you are, you're not more than 5 minutes away from another dank underground segment, and the rest of the game looking as good as it does makes these sections even duller in comparison. And while I like this game a lot more than 7, I still have some issues with the first-person perspective. You have a more limited field of view that leads to jump scares being less effective than ever. Instead of being startled, I feel like I have to move the camera around because I'm missing something the game wants me to see. It ends up just being awkward. It also makes it harder to pick up items than it should be. A lot of pickups are at waist level or below, so Ethan constantly has to turn his head downward to see the button prompts. It's really annoying when trying to grab ammo on the run, and I'm never confident whether I managed to pick it up or not. I got stuck 1 or 2 times because I hadn't fixed my gaze at the right height to see a key that was right out in the open. I kinda wish the prompts were always at eye level, regardless of where the item was. There's also a bell puzzle that stumped me and apparently a lot of other people, because when I resorted to looking it up, online guides were listing it prominently. A bell that needs to be rung is tucked away in such a hard-to-see spot that finding it became a pixel hunt. This is lame, and it also sucks. This is a very biased complaint, but I also feel like the atmosphere is still missing something that the fixed camera games had. The first-person games take the same approach to audio that the over-the-shoulder ones do, which is to focus on the diegetic sounds and reduce the role of music. I can't really remember a single theme after finishing the game. It's mostly just white noise again. I'd like to think they could keep the modern 3D audio approach while also having an interesting soundtrack at the same time. And the last thing I want to say is that Capcom made a game about vampires and werewolves and didn't even bother to reference Twilight, the series that undoubtedly inspired this story. How can you put a werewolf den in the game without including our boy Jacob? And at least one of the vampires should have borne a resemblance to Edward, just to give a nod to the greats. Maybe Ethan himself could have been revealed to be Robert Pattinson. They couldn't even be bothered to work one head rip into the final battle. Shame on you, Capcom. Instead of pushing forward, Village is kind of treading water. Capcom has found a very comfortable spot where they can indulge in their favorite parts of past games, and there isn't anything wrong with that. Not every game has to rewrite the DNA of the series. This is more like a greatest hits of Resident Evil that recaptures what made all of these games fun. It's very enjoyable to play and it doesn't get much of anything wrong. I wouldn't want the series to continue like this, but as a brief rest to look back before moving on again, Village is a great gift to the fans.
Excuse me. Sorry to have bothered you. Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice. Guess I'm supposed to thank you, right? A senior moment, perhaps. You know, you're kinda cute. Give me your number when I get back. You're small time.
Women.
Story of my life.